You build a fortress, right,
Mm-hmm.
to keep the world out. You lay the heavy stone, you lock the iron gate, and you finally, breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah, you think you're safe.
Exactly. You think the unpredictable chaos of life just can't touch you in there.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, the silence settles in.
Right.
You look at the heavy walls, you look at the complex lock on the door, and a terrifying realization hits you. You haven't built a fortress at all.
You've built a cage.
You've built a cage, and you were, like, trapped inside with the very anxieties you were trying so hard to escape.
It's really the ultimate psychological paradox of wealth and security.
It really is.
The very mechanism you construct to protect yourself from danger, well, it becomes the mechanism of your own imprisonment.
So today we are unpacking a stack of notes from a series called The Unfiltered Pulpit. And specifically, we're looking at a text titled The Root of the Rot, The Idolatry of the Dollar.
A very provocative title.
Oh, absolutely. We are diving straight into the collision between modern religious institutions and financial greed.
Yeah.
We're going to, look under the hood of the so-called prosperity gospel.
Right, to see how it operates mechanically.
Exactly. And how it transforms faith into this highly lucrative business model.
The stakes here, they are remarkably universal for the listener.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, while the framing of the source text is deeply theological, the core warning we are analyzing today is intensely psychological. We are breaking down the severe mental health toll of greed.
Which applies to literally everyone.
100%. This relentless pursuit of wealth creates a very specific emotional and spiritual cage. And the psychological machinery we're about to discuss, it operates identically whether you are sitting in a church pew on a Sunday or, sitting in a corporate boardroom on a Monday.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the baseline premise here. The notes diagnose the modern church system as being infected by a, quote, prosperity virus. For anyone listening who isn't steeped in religious critique, let's define the architecture of this virus. What does this actually look like in practice?
So mechanically, the source argues that it operates by commodifying the divine. It reduces the concept of God to basically a cosmic vending machine.
A vending machine? Wow.
Yeah, it twists theology into a speculative investment strategy. The premise sold to the congregation is incredibly simple.
Which is?
You put a monetary donation in, you pull the lever of faith, and a material blessing, wealth, health, a new car, is guaranteed to drop into the tray.
So it's essentially a consumer subscription service. It's a closed-loop transaction.
Yeah.
But the specific engine driving this machine, at least from what the text identifies, is this seed-sowing rhetoric.
Yes. And seed sowing is a highly sophisticated, deeply manipulative sociological tactic, according to the source material.
How does that actually play out in a service?
A leader stands on stage and commands the audience to, quote, sow a financial seed, which really just means give the institution your money.
Right.
But they do it with the explicit, aggressive promise of a multiplied return. It borrows the wholesome, ancient language of agriculture to mask what is
essentially a multi-level marketing scheme.
exactly a spiritualized, multi-level marketing scheme.
I find the psychological targeting of that rhetoric fascinating and honestly pretty devastating because it doesn't target the comfortable,
No, it targets the desperate.
Right. It leverages the vulnerability of people who are drowning in debt or, facing severe medical crises. It's extracting their last dollars to fund private jets and mega mansions for the leaders at the top.
Which is such a stark contrast to what it claims to be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the text points out that it deliberately equates a bank account balance with spiritual anointing.
And that's the real insidious part. By tying material wealth to divine favor, the system inherently implies that if you are poor or sick or struggling, you simply don't have enough faith.
Oh, wow. So it's your fault.
Exactly. Or worse, you haven't given the church enough money. It weaponizes guilt to drive revenue.
It completely reframes your entire relationship with the divine. You stop being a believer and you become a consumer.
Right. You're paying a premium and expecting a dividend.
But let's look at the critical vulnerability in that system. Because if faith is just a transaction, what happens to the customer when the vending machine eats their coin?
That is the big question.
Like, what happens when a family gives their life savings and the promised healing or that financial windfall simply never materializes?
Well, according to the text, the entire worldview collapses. If your theology is essentially a business plan, a financial downturn or an unanswered prayer doesn't just cause momentary disappointment.
It causes like an existential crisis.
Total existential disillusionment. Because the foundation was commercial, not spiritual. The divine was just being used as a mascot for human greed.
A mascot for greed. That is a brutal way to put it, but so accurate.
And when the mascot fails to deliver the promised return on investment, the consumer feels utterly betrayed. The source notes that they often abandon their faith entirely because they don't realize they were sold a hollow transaction from the start.
God is not for sale, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay, that moves us perfectly from the external machinery of the institution to the internal psychology of the individual. If the system is treating faith like a transaction, what does that pursuit of more actually do to the human brain?
We find the answer in a famously misquoted piece of ancient wisdom, which is 1 Timothy 6.0.
Right, everybody knows this one? Or thinks they do?
They think they do. The common colloquial phrasing is, money is the root of all evil, but the actual text is far more precise than that.
What does it actually say?
It states that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And the text we're analyzing zeroes in on one specific word used in that verse, which is eager.
Eager.
Yes, it warns that those who are eager for money wander from the faith and pierce themselves with many griefs.
Let's really analyze that concept of eagerness because, in a modern corporate environment, eagerness is a highly prized trait, right?
Absolutely. It's rewarding.
It signals ambition, drive, a strong work ethic. But here, in this source text, eagerness is framed as a serious psychological deficit.
Because in this context, eagerness is not about working hard. It is about the soul's appetite.
Okay, explain that.
Eagerness is the psychological state of perpetual deficit. It is the hedonic treadmill applied to human spirituality.
Right.
You acquire more, your baseline expectations instantly shift upward, and you are immediately hungry again.
So you never arrive at enough.
You never arrive, you just keep running.
It's a scarcity mindset masquerading as ambition. You could have $10 million in the bank, but if you are eager for $20 million, you are still operating from a place of sheer desperation.
Right. It's an appetite that physically cannot be sated.
And that constant gnawing hunger is exactly what leads to that brutal imagery the text uses, right? Pierce themselves with many griefs.
Yes, notice the phrasing there. It is a self-inflicted injury. The pursuit itself is the weapon.
Wow.
The psychological toll of constantly needing more is described in the source as a slow suicide of the soul.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second and push back on this, because there is a very common defense mechanism for this exact behavior.
Sure, let's hear it.
What if someone wants to build immense wealth, reach the highest possible tax bracket, specifically to do good? What if the eagerness is driven by a desire to, build orphanages, fund clean water initiatives, or just secure their extended family's future for 3 generations?
A philanthropic defense.
Right. If the end goal is objectively altruistic, doesn't that justify the eagerness to acquire the capital?
It is the most common defense of wealth accumulation, but the text dismantles it completely.
How so?
The argument is that if your primary motivation for this so-called kingdom work is still tethered to the thrill of achieving that higher tax bracket, the altruism is just a socially acceptable mask for the eagerness.
So it's still greed underneath.
The underlying mechanism is still greed, just sanitized with a charitable tax deduction.
But wait, how can we definitively say the motivation is corrupt if the money is actually helping people in the real world?
We can measure it by the psychological toll it takes on the individual. The source argues that if you are generating wealth purely out of a grounded desire to help others, there is a deep, abiding peace in that process.
Okay.
But if you are driven by eagerness, even a philanthropic eagerness, the anxiety of maintaining that wealth eventually replaces the peace.
You become obsessed with the next benchmark.
Exactly. If your goal is to make $100 million to help people, and you only have $50 million, you still feel impoverished. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, terrified of market fluctuations.
So you end up trading your internal peace for a piece of paper. The anxiety of protecting the wealth completely overrides the joy of utilizing it.
Which brings us right back to the psychological cage we talked about at the start.
Right, the fortress that becomes a cage.
The anxiety of protecting the capital becomes the iron bars. You think you're building a fortress of security to do good in the world, but the eagerness ensures you are actually building a cage.
And the bars might be made of gold, but a golden cage restricts your freedom just as effectively as an iron one.
That is exactly the metaphor the text is getting at.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Why do we willingly walk into it? If the mental health toll is this severe, this self-inflicted piercing of many griefs, why is the human psyche universally susceptible to this trap?
That's a great question.
It can't just be a lack of willpower, Money has to be offering us something deeply foundational.
It is. Money operates as what the text calls a counterfeit god.
A counterfeit god.
Yes. It is alluring because it promises to provide the exact three things that humans desperately crave and historically sought from the divine:
We sure.
security, identity, and power.
Let's break those three pillars down mechanistically.
Yeah.
Because that is fascinating.
Okay, so first, we crave security against the terrifying unknowns of the future. And a massive portfolio gives the illusion that a terminal illness or a tragic accident can be mitigated by capital.
Right, you feel insulated.
Second, we crave an identity that validates our work in society. And wealth instantly provides a status that commands respect from others.
And the third?
Finally, we crave power, the agency to control our circumstances and influence other people. Money mimics the divine ability to grant all three of those things.
It mimics divinity, but it's a counterfeit. It offers the illusion of control. And the foundational wisdom the text relies on here is the ancient principle that you cannot serve two masters.
Right.
You simply cannot have two ultimate priorities competing for your baseline sense of reality.
And when you attempt to serve both God and money, when you try to balance spiritual integrity with an insatiable appetite for wealth, you aren't actually achieving balance.
What are you achieving?
You are achieving compromise. You split your psychological allegiance, which creates a permanent state of internal friction.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Every single decision becomes an agonizing calculation. Does this satisfy my spiritual values, or does it protect my financial portfolio?
There is a striking visual suggested in the notes that perfectly encapsulates this friction. It suggests the image of a heavy gold-plated mask that is slowly cracking.
I love that visual.
Right. Think about the physical mechanics of wearing a mask like that. It projects an image of absolute power and invulnerability to the outside world. But for the person wearing it,
It's suffocating.
exactly. It
Really?
restricts your vision. You can hardly breathe. Beneath the gold plating, there is just profound imposter syndrome and total exhaustion.
And the exhaustion comes from the constant performance. And inevitably, under the pressure of real life, that rigid gold mask cracks.
Real life being like what?
A sudden health crisis, the collapse of a marriage, a genuine spiritual crisis. When those hit, the illusion shatters.
Right, because money can't fix those.
Exactly. The security that money promised evaporates the second you face a complex, deeply human problem that capital simply cannot solve, exposing the hollow emptiness beneath.
The conclusion drawn here by the source is incredibly stark. It says God wants your heart, not your hedge fund.
That's a great line.
The divine doesn't need your capital. It requires your uncompromised allegiance. So, look, we have thoroughly diagnosed the disease here, right? This psychological deficit of eagerness.
We have.
We've explored the symptoms, like the golden cage of anxiety and the suffocating weight of the counterfeit mask. Now, we have to pivot to the cure.
Yes, the way out.
And the cure presented in the text is something called the discipline of contentment. What does the source mean by that?
Well, it is vital to recognize that contentment, in this context, is not a passive feeling of resignation. It is an active, radical discipline.
How so?
Think about it. We live in a hyper-consumerist society, and as we discussed earlier, even modern church models are often built entirely on the metric of more.
Right. More attendance, more revenue, more explosive growth.
Exactly. In a system like that, the most disruptive, rebellious thing a human being can do is look around and declare, I have enough.
Honestly, saying I have enough almost feels like a violation of the modern social contract.
It really does.
Because our entire economy, our social media feeds, our advertising algorithms,
Yeah.
they are all predicated on the idea that you should always want a slightly better car, a slightly bigger house, a slightly higher return on your investments.
Which is exactly why the discipline of contentment is such a profound rebellion. It destroys the leverage that the world has over you.
Oh, that's a powerful way to frame it. Leverage.
Think about it. If you are not eager for more, you cannot be manipulated by marketers.
Right.
You cannot be leveraged by corporate ladders that demand your soul in exchange for a promotion. And you certainly cannot be manipulated by prosperity preachers selling a get-rich-quick gospel. Contentment removes the hook from your mouth.
But how do we actually operationalize that on, say, a Tuesday morning? The text lands on a very challenging reality for the listener.
Right.
It says you were bought with blood, not with gold. So, meaning the price of your soul is infinitely higher than your net worth. How do we take that abstract theological concept and apply it to our actual day-to-day financial lives?
It requires a ruthless audit of your internal motivations. Practically, it means examining your prayers or, if you aren't religious, examining your deepest, quietest hopes.
What are we looking for in that audit?
Are they entirely focused on your pockets? Are you constantly asking the universe for material gain? If your spiritual life is entirely focused on asking for a higher standard of living, well, your faith is incredibly shallow.
Yeah.
The discipline of contentment requires consciously stepping off that treadmill.
It requires acknowledging a very harsh truth, which the source hammers home. A financial breakthrough is completely worthless if it costs you your character to achieve it.
Exactly.
If you burn your family relationships, compromise your ethics, or destroy your peace of mind just to hit some financial milestone, you didn't succeed. You failed.
Valuing your mental and spiritual integrity over the accumulation of wealth is the only way to dismantle that golden cage.
It's the only way out.
True security comes from an unshakable understanding of who you are, completely divorced from what you possess. It is recognizing that your identity is not tied to the fluctuating numbers in a bank account.
So let's bring this all together. We started today by examining the transactional machinery of the prosperity gospel, tearing down the idea that faith is a business strategy and God is just a vending machine.
Right.
We explored the devastating mechanics of the love of money, seeing how the eagerness for more acts as a self-inflicted weapon, piercing us with relentless anxieties.
The slow suicide.
Exactly. We uncovered the hollow, exhausting promise of the counterfeit God and the cracking of the golden mask. And finally, we look at the sheer radical power of the discipline of contentment.
The core realization for you to walk away with is that the appetite for more can never be satisfied. It is a psychological and mathematical impossibility.
Yeah, the math just doesn't work.
True peace is never going to be found in the pursuit of the next benchmark. It is only found in guarding your character against the idolatry of the dollar and refusing to let your soul be compromised by greed.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think back to that cage and the griefs we pierce ourselves with when we are consumed by eagerness.
It's a sobering image.
Look closely at your daily life right now. What specific anxieties, what chronic, exhausting stresses, and what daily griefs are you currently accepting as normal, simply because the world convinced you that chasing more was the only valid way to live? Think about it. Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Inbox of Grace. Remember to like and follow.